everyone. Welcome back to Astrology Today with Jeff Harman. I'm Ella, Jeff's assistant. Thanks so much for joining us on Mondays. It's Monday, April 22nd. I hope you're doing well. We've got a full moon coming up tomorrow afternoon, and we are about to touch on Mercury retrograde stationing and going direct, thank God, because it has been a tough Mercury retrograde. Communications have been so wonky, at least for me, they've been. So Jeff's going to go into all of this and take it away, Jeff.
All right. Thanks for that. So yeah, this whole energy right now is really building what's coming up here. And we've been talking about this the last couple of podcasts. And of course, many people have been, referring to this eclipse. And one of the things that's important is we got a full moon here coming up tomorrow night on the 23rd at 4:50 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And that's happening opposite, of course, the sun. It's always a full moon. And it's happening in a very powerful lunar mansion. It's ruled by the moon's north node, Jupiter, and Mars. So these are the subperiods. And it's called Sfati. Some people pronounce it differently, but it's a very powerful, and it actually is a very clever kind of unraveling again, good for the mind in strategy. So I like this. Full moons are always intense. You can feel the energy. It builds. This is where things come to fruition. And it's often not a great time to commence acts on right on the full moon, but right after that, it's good. So depending on the aspects it makes. So Mercury goes direct on the 25th, which will be right at 5:54 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, or if you're on the Pacific Coast, or 8:54, or wherever you happen to be. So Mercury going direct is also an interesting on this whole eclipse because it's happening right on the north node. See, Mercury starts stationing, just coming to a screeching halt, and it's within minutes of conjunction of the moon's north node eclipse point, so which has moved since the eclipse. But Rahu, or the moon's north node, has always been considered to be our perception of reality. It's the movie we're all playing. So, and again, look at some of the movies we're seeing. Look at the current events. We've had this whole issue with Iran attacking Israel. Now there's a possible, there's been a retaliatory strike coming back, and we don't know what's coming next. I think that's going to stay in a holding pattern for a minute. I think the biggest one that just happened is the funding bill that happened within the House. And of course, a lot of people are very happy about it, and a lot of people are very angry about it, because it's also got funding to protect Taiwan, and of course, a lot of funding in there for Ukraine. So this is heating up more of the energy here between, again, Russia, the United States, and the BRICS nations, which has also been really another thing in the background. I say the financial is really going to keep ratcheting up here this year. Inflation is stacking to the ceiling. And I think when this eclipse point gets crossed in May, which is going to be approximately right around May 25th, so that's about a month from now, but that is a trigger point where I think we're going to start to see a lot of events come to fore. And, we've got the director of the FBI himself telling us, well, there's a big possibility of Chinese hackers, also all kinds of terrorist threats. And we see the same thing. The mayor of Los Angeles just had her house broken into. So crime is definitely on the rise. The UN keeps flying more and more and more people in here secretly, let alone what's being stampeded across the border. And of course, that's one of the big things that has been a gripe from many people, is that there's been no funding for the border. It's just wide open, let them come in, and again, there's nothing wrong with people coming in our country. There is something wrong with people coming in and just getting a rubber stamp, getting funded to become voters, and shoving American people out of work. So this is really a very interesting time, and it goes along with what I've been saying, the Pluto return, which this brings me to another whole issue. When we look at what's been happening in the politics of this election, and we also look at what just happened in the House, this kind of is an echo back to what the founding forefathers said. They said, if anyone gets to print our money, they'll be more dangerous than any standing army. Well, Woodrow Wilson actually was a large factor in the 16th Amendment, the Federal Reserve Act, and of course the IRS being formed, all that, which is really when a small group of bankers got the ability to print the money of this country.
Nobody seems to notice. Nobody seems to care. That's what the owners count on, the fact that Americans will probably remain willfully ignorant.
And this is interesting because, we hear all the time about, well, it's a democracy. There's an old saying, Benjamin Franklin said, that the definition of a democracy is two wolves having dinner with a sheep. So this is the interesting thing. We hear all about the democratic process. And really, democracy is not the same as what the Constitution or a constitutional republic is. So this was very much known about with all of our founding forefathers, and it's exactly where we're at right now. And I think this is again, Pluto return. What concerns me the most is the Saturn conjuncting Mars by solar arc direction on the United States chart this September. So I think we're going to see Trump run into some real trouble here, even though, he may get out of it. I think they're going to really come down on this guy one way or another. And I think when you see, we're going to do a special on Trump where we actually talk about the astrology. He's got Uranus transiting his midheaven, and talk about disruption and change. We'll even talk about Trump's chart, how it showed in the 220, the whole election thing would have gotten disrupted like it did. So very interesting stuff, how the astrology mirrors this. So that is some highlights that I wanted to go through here. The other thing I want to talk about in the short term is Mars is going to conjunct Neptune this Sunday, the 28th, at about 9:31 p.m. And of course, that's Pacific Daylight Time. If you're on the East Coast, it'll be 3 hours later. But what might that mean? Mars and Neptune is always the twilight zone. So we're likely to see some more subterfuge, not that we don't all the time anyhow, but coming in near the end of the week into the first part of next week. Of course, that's Sunday, and we'll see what happens when we get to the next podcast and see what it brought. But I can tell you, the biggest thing that I'm seeing right now is the United States has never been under this much duress financially and also globally in its position. When we look at the inflation that's going on, the infiltration of the border, we look at the dissension in the politics. And, I always say the real source here is not the politicians. It is the bankers that run this country. And they did get control of it. And that's exactly what happened on a Saturn-Pluto conjunction back in 1913, the beginning of 1914, which is when all this happened. That was also right when World War I was getting going. So if we go back and we look at these time periods, there is secret astrology that actually shows exactly when these events happen. And I've been saying 2020 is the move. And we're going to see whether this country, again, is the phoenix rising out of the ashes, or is it going to be transformed into a socialist republic? Because it is halfway there right now, maybe closer to 3/4. And even though we see the politicians voting and doing what they're doing, there are powers above it. And that's the money that's constantly being dished out to influence the directions at which everything ends up at. And this is clearly where we're at. And it's going to be fun to see. Now, I want to talk about something else that was kind of exciting that happened to me last week. I have some really exciting clients, and one of them is a psychiatrist. I'm not going to mention her name unless I had her approval. But what was fascinating is I love to see medical doctors and psychiatrists and psychologists who are really studying the mind also talk about angels and spirits and possessions and all these types of things. Well, what was so interesting is we got talking about the Archangel Metatron. And many people may have heard of that. And of course, on the Tree of Life, Archangel Metatron was always considered to be the highest, what we call Sephira on the Tree of Life. Well, you can see here on the screen as I morph these back and forth, all the archangels rule the planets. They actually say there's 7 major archangels, but then the upper Sephira, which is known as Chokmah and wisdom, rules the archangel Ratziel, called the wisdom of God. And then as we go up to the top, you see Archangel Metatron. So all these planets have archangels that rule them. And of course, many times I've mentioned the major tree of life, which is the kind of divinity model from God down in through the various different dimensions of creation. And of course, here we are in these biological meat suits called bodies, right? And what's fascinating is to talk in psychology and psychiatry with people about the spiritual component of the human aura as well as the lower conscious mind. And of course, many times I always mention this. You can see here, if I morph this back and forth, you can actually see the lower conscious mind is synonymous with the moon. And this is very parallel to what Vedic and Nadi astrology refers to as the lower manas of the mind, or what we could say our emotional perception of reality. So this is really cool stuff because you can see the ruach, or the spirit, some people call it Rosh, but it is the spirit which keeps the whole life force energies moving. And then we see the neshama above that big thick dashed line, known as the division between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. And there you can see Metatron is also the archangel that's metaphoric to the Godhead of the soul. So these angels are really fascinating things. And I love angelology because I'm actually working on a project right now where we're taking and being able to identify every single angel that rules every sidereal degree of the zodiac. And this is very ancient stuff. It's been done in many different ways, but fascinating. And I've mentioned before how the eastern horizon, where you're born, the longitude and latitude of where a person is born, or for that matter, any being, that is where spirit manifests. And I find it absolutely fascinating that the angel that manifests at that degree on the eastern horizon, if you shot a laser off the earth, right when a person is born, at that minute and second, that degree rules an angelic force. And I'm actually taking some old documents right now and modifying them so that they're more accurate to the descriptions, kind of amalgamating them. So it's a lot of fun. And I just thought I would bring this up because it's such a cool thing to look at angels. And many of the books that I mentioned, like the Megas of Strovolos, talks about how angels guide the souls through these incarnations. And of course, I mark this stuff on angelic pendants, where people actually get the name of their guardian angel, and it actually shows a lot of really cool karmic things that show up in the lineage of the soul. And these are great secrets that are contained in the ancient biblical documents, especially when we take them back to the Aramaic and the Hebrew in the original Old Testament. Very fascinating stuff, and the Psalms are in there too. So I just thought I'd talk about that for a minute.
Wow. Thank you so much for this, Jeff. Angels, I mean, they're everywhere. They're just all around us all the time. Thank God for them. Thank you all for watching. Have a great Monday, a great week ahead. Enjoy the full moon, and we'll see you next time on Astrology Today with Jeff Harman.